My mother-in-law, Karen, asked me to drive her to the neighborhood center. I quickly packed my things without telling my wife, Emily. She was used to my sudden departures, and I didn't know what Karen needed, but it seemed urgent. Curiosity and anxiety overwhelmed me as I tried to imagine what could be so important. Karen was waiting in the driveway when I pulled up, and we immediately pulled into the driveway. She got in the back seat and we chatted to pass the time. The trip took about an hour each way, and we discussed family news, laughed about gossip, and generally had a comfortable time. We made a quick stop for coffee and I handed her a cup. The car bounced slightly on a pothole and I apologized, but she only laughed, brushing it off as nothing. "Turn around for a minute," Karen said. "I need to change my sweater." I tried not to look, but curiosity took over. Karen struggled with the sweater and finally asked me for help. I stopped the car, moved to the back seat, and helped her. One thing led to another, and we found ourselves in a moment of passion where the tension between us finally broke free. After that, we continued the ride, ran her errands, and headed back. The atmosphere between us had changed. It was charged, electric, and neither of us could ignore it. I bought more coffee on the way home and we stopped again, repeating what had happened before. Karen was spunky, and the secrecy made it even more intense. It was exciting like nothing I had experienced before. I drove her home and then returned to Emily, who was preparing dinner. I complimented her, feeling a prick of guilt, but pushed it aside. Emily had no idea about anything, and I intended for it to be that way. She deserved better, but the excitement of my secret with Karen kept me on my toes. The next morning, Karen called again and asked for a ride. I couldn't deny the excitement that swept over me. We stopped halfway and the situation escalated again. We were both too deeply involved to stop, entangled in something we couldn't so easily walk away from. Karen and I got into a routine, finding excuses to see each other at least once a week. It added a spark to my otherwise predictable life, an adrenaline rush I couldn't resist. One day, Karen suggested a scenic spot 2 hours away. We spent the day there, parked in a secluded spot, and succumbed to temptation again. The feeling was surreal, as if we were in a world of our own, far removed from reality. Afterwards, as we sat in the car, Karen said, "I haven't felt so alive in a long time." I nodded, knowing exactly what she meant. There was something about our secret that made everything more vivid: every touch, every kiss, every stolen moment. We continued our secret trips, each one riskier than the last. We planned entire days together, visiting places where no one would recognize us. We dined at off-the-grid diners, walked through parks hand in hand, and rented small motel rooms when we needed privacy. The excitement of getting caught made this activity even more exciting. One weekend, Karen suggested we go camping. She said she had an old tent and all the gear we needed. I was hesitant at first. Spending an entire weekend together was a big risk, but the idea of being alone with her for so long was too tempting to resist. We packed up and drove to a secluded campground deep in the woods. It was peaceful there, no one for miles around. We pitched our tent, built a fire, and sat by it, watching the flames dance as the sun set behind the trees. The forest was quiet, with only the crackling of wood and the occasional rustle of leaves. We spent the whole weekend wrapped up in each other. The solitude made everything more intense. We talked for hours, sharing secrets we'd never told anyone else. Karen talked about her life with her late husband, her regrets and fears about aging. I listened to her, feeling a deeper connection to her than I had ever felt before. In those moments, I felt like we were the only two people in the world. We slept in each other's arms, and I awoke to the chirping of birds and the morning light streaming into the tent. It was bliss, and for a while I let myself forget about the consequences, about Emily, about everything else. But the more time we spent together, the harder it became to separate my two lives. I lied to Emily about work, made excuses to get out of the house. Karen brought out a side of me that I hadn't felt in years, spontaneous and alive, unencumbered by the responsibilities of everyday life. One day, Karen offered to rent a small cabin by the lake for a few days. She said she knew of a place where we could be completely alone, away from everyone. The idea sounded perfect, like a dream, but I hesitated. It was getting riskier. Emily started asking questions, wondering why I wasn't home all the time. But there was a familiar glint in Karen's eyes, and I agreed, despite the nagging voice in the back of my head warning me to stop. A week later, we drove to the lake. The cabin was small but cozy, right at the water's edge, with a view that took my breath away. We spent the days swimming, cooking, and lying on the dock watching the clouds go by. Nights were even better, just the two of us, the gentle sound of the waves crashing against the shore, the moonlight casting soft reflections on the water. It was like we were in our own little world, away from everything and everyone. But in the back of my mind, I knew it couldn't go on like this. Eventually, we left the cabin and reality caught up with us. When I dropped Karen off at her house, she smiled sadly and squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Mike," she whispered, "for everything." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Take care of yourself, Karen," I replied, looking after her as she walked away. The door closed behind her and I sat staring at the house for another moment, feeling a mixture of emotions I couldn't make out. Driving home, I tried to clear my head, but the memories of our time together wouldn't let go. Emily was home as always, waiting for me with a warm smile and dinner on the stove. I walked in, kissed her cheek, and tried to push everything else to the back of my mind. I had a decision to make, but for now I just wanted to hold on to the fleeting moments of happiness, no matter how difficult they were. Karen and I continued to see each other, though not as often. We both realized that it was only a matter of time before something would make itself known. The thrill was still there, but now there was an underlying tension, a sense of inevitability. We were playing a dangerous game, and sooner or later we would have to face the consequences. But for now we carried on, savoring every moment, every touch, every stolen glance. And as long as we could hide it, we were determined to keep going, no matter what it took. One afternoon, Karen called me again, her voice playful. "Mike, I think I left something in your car yesterday. Do you mind if we take another ride?" I chuckled, knowing exactly what she meant. "Sure, Karen. Where to this time?" She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Maybe somewhere far away? I hear there's a beautiful scenic spot about 2 hours from here. We could spend the whole day there." I agreed, feeling a familiar excitement rising in me. We drove to the spot and the scenery was breathtaking, but neither of us were really interested in viewing it. We parked in a secluded spot and gave in to temptation again. The experience was almost surreal. We were in nature, the wind was rustling in the trees, and we were immersed in our own world. Afterward, we sat in silence, sipping the coffee I had brought with me. Karen looked up at me and her expression softened. "You know, Mike, this is crazy, but I haven't felt this alive in a long time." I nodded, knowing exactly what she meant. There was something intoxicating about the mystery, the stolen moments, the adrenaline rush. It was dangerous, but that was the beauty of it. We both knew it couldn't last forever, but for now it was enough for us to live in the moment, savoring every opportunity. Eventually we made it back and I dropped her off at her house. She gave me a long look before getting out of the car, and I followed her until she disappeared inside. As I drove home, my mind was spinning with thoughts of Karen and Emily, the two women who now occupied my life in such different ways. Emily had already returned to the stove and was cooking something, filling the house with a pleasant aroma. I kissed her on the cheek, and we continued our evening as if nothing had changed. Karen and I continued our secret trips, each one bolder than the last. We found new places to stop, new reasons to be alone together. It was risky, and we both knew the possible consequences, but neither of us could bring ourselves to stop. It became a part of our lives, a secret thread woven into the fabric of our everyday lives. And as long as we could hide it, we were determined to keep at it. One day, Emily mentioned that Karen seemed happier lately, that she'd noticed a change in her demeanor. I smiled, pretending not to know anything, but inside my heart was racing. It was only a matter of time before someone connected the dots, but I pushed that thought away. For now, all I could do was enjoy the ride, knowing that it would all come crashing down eventually.